My seniors and dear friends, I am Dr. Snehashish Burman, Honorary Secretary of AY West Bengal. On behalf of AY West Bengal, I welcome you all to today's event. We have learned to live with the new normal protocols of life. Corona pandemic has struck us very badly, taking lives, destroying our social life and economic status. But we will fight the situation together and mankind will win. As the pandemic hit India in March, AY West Bengal has donated rupees 2 lakh to the West Bengal Chief Minister's Relief Fund to fight Corona pandemic. And we have started distributing safety kits, including PPE, mask, face shield, hand sanitizer, etc. From our association free of cost to all our ENT colleagues and PGTs all over West Bengal, irrespective of their membership status, who are fighting Corona pandemic from the front line. During the lockdown, few of our members have come forward to collect and distribute the kits by hand, despite the risk of contamination. Corona pandemic and lockdown could not stop us from organizing academic activities of AY West Bengal. We have organized prestigious Rashmani Mukhopadhyay Memorial Oration, monthly clinical meetings, AY West Bengal journal clubs, and awareness programs under our Safe Practice, Best Practice campaign on digital platform, and we got huge response from our fraternity. With your support, we believe Corona pandemic will fail to stop us from moving ahead. Continuing our academic activity, we have organized prestigious Dr. Abilal Mukherjee Memorial Oration today on digital platform, and we are happy that Dr. Renuka Bradu is with us to deliver the oration. Now I request Dr. Shubhajit Banerjee, our president, to deliver his message.
Good evening and a warm welcome to all of you from AY West Bengal. Today, we are going to host the prestigious Dr. Abilal Mukherjee Memorial Oration, which was started in the year 2008. This year, we, for the first time, are going to hold it on a virtual platform. It gives me immense pleasure to say a few words about my teacher, late Professor Dr. Abilal Mukherjee. Born in the year 1928, he completed his MBBS from Calcutta Medical College. He had done his MS from Darbhanga Medical College and DLO from London. In the year 1980, Professor Mukherjee made a documentary film named Srinontu on noise pollution, which was shown in the annual conference of AY West Bengal being held at Krishnanagar. He was actively involved in the fight against noise pollution and other social activities. He became the president of AY in the year 1985 at Madras Conference. He was the organizing chairman of AYCon Kolkata in the year 1986. Professor Mukherjee became president of AY West Bengal in 1988. He was a renowned teacher, a teacher of teachers, and many of his students are legends in the field of ENT in West Bengal. He was the pioneer of modern ENT practice in West Bengal. Sir retired as head of the department ENT from Calcutta Medical College. He passed away in the year 2013. I welcome Dr. Professor Renuka Bradu to our association, who will be delivering this year's oration. I now hand over the mic to our beloved treasurer, Professor Dr. Doipan Mukherjee, who is a professor at KPC Medical College in Kolkata, who you all remember has successfully conducted AYCon 2017 and ISOCon in 2019 in Kolkata. Dr. Mukherjee, please.
Thank you, President and Secretary of AY West Bengal. This is a privilege for me to introduce Dr. Renuka Bradu Madam for the first ever virtual Dr. Abilal Mukherjee oration. Madam is Professor and head of the Department of ENT and Head and Neck Surgery at LTM Medical College and General Hospital, Mumbai, India. She is an internationally acknowledged expert in the field of endoscopic sinus and skull base surgery. Her special interest and focus of research is a tumor called juvenile nasopharyngeal angiofibroma, and she was the first surgeon in India and among the first in the world to undertake endoscopic excision of this tumor. Her work in this field over the last 18 years has culminated in one of the largest international series of this rare tumor, and she has pioneered the push-pull approach for very large nasopharyngeal angiofibroma tumors. She is the author of Anatomical Principles of Endoscopic Sinus Surgery, a step-by-step approach, and has 10 textbook chapters and numerous peer-reviewed publications to her credit. She has been awarded many orations, and she has conducted an annual course in endoscopic sinus surgery at her institution over the last 16 years, during which she has trained over 1,500 ENT surgeons from India and abroad. She has lectured or conducted surgical workshops throughout India and in many other countries like USA, Malaysia, Indonesia, Australia, Bahrain, Egypt, Sri Lanka, Dubai, Oman, and Nepal. She also conducts hands-on workshops in airway reconstructive surgery, her other field of interest. She has been awarded the Weimar Fellowship and has a keen interest in medical teaching. Now, over to Madam.
At the outset, I'd like to thank Dr. Subhajit Banerjee, President of AOI West Bengal, Dr. Snehasis Burman, and Dr. Dwaipan Mukherjee for inviting me to share my views. Give me a minute, I'm just checking on my Wi-Fi.
Now it's good, ma'am. Please share your presentation.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Your
Yes, ma'am.
Can you hear me?
is good.
Yeah,
Yes,
we
ma'am.
can hear you. You can just share the screen.
Yeah, I've shared the screen, but there's no other speaker. I can't see my own little logo, so I'm not sure whether you can hear me or not.
No, we are hearing you, but the screen is not shared yet.
Okay.
And
So-
actually, we actually off all our videos and audios from
okay,
our side.
I'll just share the screen again one more time.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'll continue. In case there's because I can't see anyone else, I don't know whether you can hear me or not. So just let me know if you can't hear me.
But ma'am, your slides are not visible.
Pardon?
Madam, we are clearly hearing
Yes,
you.
Dwaipan, I can see you now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see you.
Yeah.
Actually,
Madam,
Accept
you
my
just,
request, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
yeah. Now the screen is coming.
Yeah, so thank you so much. So we'll carry on. As I said, I'd just like to repeat that I'd like to thank Dr. Subhajit Banerjee, Snehasis, and Dwaipayan for inviting me to share my views. We are in a difficult time now. What happened? My slide is not advancing.
You can just click your mouse.
No, I've done that.
No, you have stopped sharing. So you can again share the slide.
Yeah, just a minute. Yeah, that's better. You can share the screen now. Are you able to see my screen?
No, ma'am.
Just a minute. Now, are you able to see it?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Now, can you see it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's fine. So these are difficult times and we need the remover of obstacles. And at the moment, Maharashtra is celebrating its Ganpati Utsav. And we hope that he will remove these obstacles of COVID, which we are facing just now. And I'd like to dedicate this lecture to all the residents all over the country who are on the front line fighting this disease. It is a deep honor for me to take the oration of Dr. Abhilan Mukherjee, one of the most illustrious stalwarts in the field of ENT. And I thank you again for inviting me. So before the endoscope era, before the dawn of the endoscope era, the angiofibroma surgery was more like guerrilla warfare. You went in quickly, you did as much as you could, as fast as you could, and you came out quickly and left behind a bloodbath and pack, and 6 months later, the patient would be back with a recurrence. I have seen that era, and I have then seen how angiofibroma surgery changed over the years. And I'm going to, in this oration, take you along with me on what has been for me a very challenging, exciting, and sometimes frustrating journey, peppered with eureka moments as well as moments of despair. And one thing if I learned was that you don't need to see the whole staircase in order to take the first step. And the first step, of course, was the realization that one can do this tumor with an endoscopic approach. And the endoscope not only showed us the angiofibroma in a different way, but it also improved our understanding of the angiofibroma in a very significant way. And for the first time, we were able to understand the biological behavior of this tumor as we saw it through an endoscope. And we were now on our way to having control over the tumor rather than the tumor controlling us. What we learned was that the angiofibroma is very, very different from any other skull-based tumor. And it follows its own set of rules. And therefore, we have to have a different set of rules to manage an angiofibroma as opposed to any other skull-based tumor. So what is the difference? The difference is that it grows submucosally. It grows through crevices and foramina along the skull base without destroying intervening bone. So unlike a cancer, which will destroy the bone, this one leaves the bone intact. It bleeds torrentially. And therefore, of course, quite often one has an incomplete removal of the tumor and a very high rate of recurrence. And it can grow in multiple ways. And even today, as I operate on it, I find newer and more unorthodox, untraditional ways by which it grows. These are just a few of them that I've put up. But the most important thing, the three most important things that I always want to emphasize and which I never forget while operating is one, that it cannot be, unlike say a pituitary macroadenoma, it cannot be sucked out. It cannot be made to collapse on itself. And it stays like a solid tumor between you and the critical neurovascular structures which lie beyond it, like the carotid artery, like the nerves in the cavernous sinus. But most important, it occurs in a young boy with no neurovascular deficit who has walked into your operation theater, and it behoves you that this young boy is able to go back without any neurological deficit whatsoever. These are the principles of management that I set up more than 22 years ago. And they hold true even today. Of course, we have changed them along the way, but these are the ones that I set up right in the beginning, that you have to do a subperiosteal dissection without breaching tumor parenchyma. So that was a time when we tried under any circumstances not to breach the tumor parenchyma, not to remove the entire tumor as one mass. We've changed that strategy in certain tumors now, but that was our principle then. You can use monopolar or bipolar cauterization depending on where you're operating. You remove all the bony partitions which tend to dumbbell the tumor, which tend to hold up the tumor. And you repeat this with meticulousness and patience until the entire tumor lies free, like a rattle, right? Free within the skull base and inside the skull, and then you can deliver it transorally. I'm going to do very briefly go over the very standard steps of angiofibroma excision. This is a very routine case. It's a tumor involving mainly the nose, nasopharynx, infratemporal fossa, and the sphenoid sinus on the left nasal cavity. That's the septum, and that's the inferior turbinate, that's the middle turbinate, and that's the tumor. So the first thing one does is, like one goes into a battlefield, one needs to see where the troops are, where things are. So this is exactly what you do. With an endoscope, you first move the tumor around gently, look at whether it's adherent to the middle turbinate, whether it's adherent to the septum. Go in through the opposite nostril. This is the right nostril, looking at it in the nasopharynx on the opposite side. And then transorally, where you can see the mass in the nasopharynx and you can see it emerge from the posterior choana on that side. The next thing is to first trim the middle turbinate. I trim the middle turbinate for access. Now, it's very important that whenever we use a cautery, and this is something I'd like you to remember, is that whenever you use a cautery, so this is looking at for the adherence at the middle turbinate. Now, whenever you use a cautery, it must be used on normal tissue. It should not be used at the junction of the normal tissue and the tumor, because there's a chance that you may cauterize the tumor and lose its margin. So always the cauterization is done on normal tissue close to the tumor, so that some amount of normal tissue like this remains adherent to the tumor, and you know that you've got the entire tumor and not left some part of it behind. The next thing is to open the maxillary sinus. So the maxillary sinus is opened widely. You remove the mucosa of the maxillary sinus. You may or may not remove the inferior turbinate. I don't remove it in most cases. In almost 90% of cases, I don't remove it. So now you can see that the tumor is in the nose and in the maxillary sinus. This is the tumor in the nose. The posterior wall of the maxillary sinus is eroded, and you can see the tumor in the pterygopalatine fossa and the infratemporal fossa. And this is the perpendicular plate of the palatine bone that we've removed to release the dumbbelling. And this is the posterior wall of the maxillary sinus being removed to release the tumor. Once the posterior wall of the maxillary sinus is removed, one can cauterize and incise on the periosteum of the infratemporal fossa. And once we have incised that periosteum, one can start delivering the tumor gradually into the nasal cavity. And as one does that, the maxillary artery is put at stretch, and one can cauterize or clip it and cut it so as to release the tumor. The maxillary artery tends to be redundant. It tends to have a very sinuous course, and therefore when you pull on the tumor, it doesn't tear. It tends to be stretched, and you can see it very well once you have put a traction on the tumor. There is an extension in this tumor in the sphenoid sinus, and you can see that this is the tumor in the sphenoid sinus. And this is the bone which is holding it up. Most tumors go through the floor of the sphenoid sinus. They don't go through the anterior wall of the sphenoid sinus. And you need to remove this bone, which lies between the two of them, and then gradually deliver the sphenoid extension into the nasal cavity. So basically, cauterize or cut the adhesion, remove the bone between the tumor and the main part of the tumor, and then deliver out the extension. Now, this is towards the later part of the surgery where we are removing the adhesions of the tumor from the lateral nasal wall. There are always adhesions just above the inferior turbinate and anterior to the eustachian tube. And this is where we are releasing it from the roof of the posterior choana. And you can see now that the entire tumor is free, does not have any adhesions, and therefore can be delivered transorally with all its extensions intact. What I'd like you to see is that if it's done correctly, if the surgery has gone according to plan, there is no postoperative bleeding. You can see that there is absolutely no bleeding. You can see all the structures in the cavity very clearly, which means that you've not left behind part of the tumor. This has been a very different experience with endoscopy as compared to what our experience used to be when we were doing it by open approaches, where at the end of the surgery, there used to be a lot of bleeding and a lot of packing required. This is a patient 5 days after open surgery. These are both patients whom I've treated. So this is the pre-endoscopic era, 5 days after surgery. And this is the patient next day after surgery. And you can see he's talking, eating, drinking. He has one nostril open and breathing quite comfortably at the end of the surgery. So one thing that we noticed first is that the decrease in morbidity was significant. And this is the same patient a year post-op, and you can see how, the mucociliary beat has recommenced, and we don't see crusting in post-angiofibrosis surgery as one would expect. Yes, I have operated in Egypt and in the Middle East where the air is very dry, and those patients do tend to have crusting. But whereas in India, I see far less crusting than one would expect. We have even today a very rigid follow-up protocol. We follow them up for 4 years, and it really depends on what we feel was the prognosis at the time of the surgery. So at the end of all our surgical notes, there is a line which says expected prognosis. And if the expected prognosis says that entire tumor removed, good prognosis, then we call them every year. But if we have an expected prognosis that query residual tumor remaining behind, then we call them at 3 months or 6 months. We do a nasal endoscopy or imaging, and we do contrast enhanced CT scans for all patients once a year and an MRI at 4 years before we discharge them from care. And this is something which is rigidly followed by all my patients from all over the country. In fact, this is one thing we get them to commit to before we operate. So our journey began with very small tumors. In fact, the first child, this is not the one, but the first child I operated was an orphan who had come with a 90-year-old granny from Parbhani district. But we started with tumors like this, very small in the nose nasopharynx, and then we went on to larger tumors in the infratemporal fossa, pterygopalatine fossa, and we started presenting our work. And everywhere I went, people asked me one question. They asked me, how big a tumor can you do endoscopically? And it would be this big or this big or this big. What I've learned over the years is that it's not how big the tumor is. It is where the tumor is. And there are certain tumors which you can do by endoscopy or open, but there is no tumor that you cannot, that can be done only by open approach without an endoscope now. Look at this tumor. It's a very large tumor, and I would be asked, can you do this endoscopically? Well, the answer to this particular tumor is that it can be done only endoscopically. You cannot manage it completely by open approach because you see that the pterygoid plates are there, and beyond that, the tumor has gone beyond them into the pterygoid fossa. So no matter how large an open approach you take, you will not be able to access this part of the tumor unless you have an endoscope which can go beyond the tumor, look at these plates, remove them, or whatever needs to be done to get to the pterygoid fossa extension. So there are tumors which cannot be approached only by an open approach. They mandatorily need an endoscope to help. And these are, of course, the post-op views. So maybe in the first 2 years, we standardized our surgical steps. We were able to repeat them. And we found, obviously, there are a whole lot of advantages to endoscopic excision. The significant one being that we can be absolutely sure on table whether we've removed the tumor completely, because there's a significantly minimized blood loss. And because we are sure about that, there's been a significant decreased rate of recurrence. So the recurrence rates in the world were around 20% for extracranial tumors, and they came down to almost 5% by the first 3 or 4 years of endoscopic excision. Now, this is a slide that I'd like to share with you in 2002, a presentation I made in 2002. It was about 5 years since I had started the endoscopic procedures, surgeries on these tumors. And at that time, I'd said that it is not in that, I just picked up the slide and put it directly into this presentation. At that time, I'd said that it's not possible in certain tumors with far lateral infratemporal fossa involvement, superior orbital fissure, intracranial involvement. But as you can see, there are already question marks. That means we'd already started questioning that at that time. And I think the only criteria which remains today is that a large intranasal component where you can't put in a telescope into the nose, that's the only one where you would need to first approach it by a non-endoscopic approach before you went for an endoscopic approach. At that time, we also said that good preoperative embolization was mandatory, because it was difficult, severe intraoperative hemorrhage was difficult to control, and it increased intraoperative time. Now, all that has changed because we now know how to control the carotid during endoscopic surgery. So all that has changed. There are a wide variety of views on whether one should embolize the tumors or not. On one hand, there are centers like Pittsburgh in the US who embolize each and every tumor. There are those who don't embolize any tumors. My particular stand as of now is this, and that is that embolization is technology which is available to us. It makes life simpler. It allows us to see the tumor without too much bleeding. And therefore, when you are at the beginning of your journey, when you are still learning to deal with angiofibromas, take all the help that you can get and definitely embolize the tumors so that you're able to do the surgery to your satisfaction and to the patient's satisfaction. As you grow, you will be able to handle these tumors without embolization, and that's the time when you can take a second call as to whether you want to embolize or not. The other conditions in which I embolize is that if there's a very large extracranial component, then by the time you have operated that extracranial component, there may be so much of blood loss already that you may not be able to go for the intracranial component at the same sitting. And therefore, when there's a very large extracranial component, I prefer to embolize. The embolization is with super selective catheters, which go right through the maxillary artery up to the tumor. And you see this tumor, the tumor blushes embolized, but the entire maxillary artery still is not embolized. So this is super selective embolization only into the tumor and leaving the arteries behind. So even if you've embolized the tumor, when you're operating, you will have to control the maxillary artery because it has not been embolized. And with this super selective catheterization, the previous and PVA particles, the previous dangers of gel foam, embolization with gel foam with large catheters, which caused all those complications, is now very, very, very minuscule, the risk as compared to what it was before. So, so the first step was, of course, endoscopic approach. The second was, how do we start now dealing with larger tumors? That was the issue. And there is not just skill required, but there's a technique required to be standardized when one is dealing with very, very large tumors. Something like this, or the CT scan of the same tumor. These are the pre and post-op. This is a tumor which has been dealt with primarily endoscopically and without an open approach. So how does one go about doing endoscopic surgery on these kind of tumors? So there are three frontiers in the angiofibroma. The first frontier is extracranial tumors like this, which are large, which are very far laterally extending, difficult to get with an endoscope from the nasal cavity. Then there are the intracranial tumors. And then there is something which is not talked about very often, And that is that there is a third frontier, and that is the intraosseous tumors. These are not angiofibromas which are extracranial or intracranial. They lie within the compact table of bone of the greater wing of the sphenoid, the clivus, because the angiofibroma behaves differently in cancellous marrow bone than it does with compact bone. So within the bones of the skull base, the tumor tends to grow without an extracranial or intracranial component. And this has been one of the more recent challenges that we've had to face. So let's talk about very large extracranial tumors. So let's look at this one. Now, when you look at this, one feels that it is too laterally extending into the parapharyngeal area to be able to get to it with a 0-degree endoscope from the nose. That's very true. And what most people have done is they have started doing what is the endoscopic modified Denker's approach, where they remove the pyriform aperture and the inferior turbinate to get to that. I prefer to do something else, and I will speak to you about the rationale of what I do a little later after a few more slides. But let's look at what I would do in a tumor like this. And that technique is called the push-pull approach. Very simple. It was, I published this and I first presented it in 2005 in Indonesia and in Australia. So someone is pushing and someone is pulling at the tumor. So the first thing is that we make an incision in the buccogingival sulcus near the second and third molar. This one is a little longer, but usually we make just about 1 inch, just enough to admit the finger of the assistant surgeon. And what we do is, the problem is that when you have a tumor like this, which is very laterally placed, and if you try to pull on it, every time it falls back in. And you're not able to get to the extent because every time it tends to fall in. So in order to avoid this, the assistant puts in a finger through the buccogingival sulcus, while the primary surgeon operates from the nose. Now, the assistant does not dissect the tumor. Because there's a danger that they may damage the maxillary artery. You need an assistant who has worked with you before. And what the assistant does is actually stabilize the tumor while the primary surgeon operates on it. So something like this. That's the finger of the assistant stabilizing the tumor so that it doesn't fall back while the primary surgeon operates on it. And this is how you can remove entire large tumors without causing significant dissection or removal of the pyriform aperture, the lacrimal system, the inferior turbinate. In this case, we remove the inferior turbinate, but otherwise with minimal morbidity to remove external extensive tumors which which are far lateral in the infratemporal, parapharyngeal, or the temporal fossa. So the next step that we came across was intracranial tumors. Now, there was almost a 50% recurrence rate in intracranial tumors. It's come down significantly. It's almost about 20% now. How did we deal with intracranial tumors? So it's not enough to know that it's intracranial. It's not enough also to know where it is. Is it in the middle cranial fossa? Is it near the Meckel's cave? Is it near the anterior cranial fossa? What is the real question that needs to be answered is, how did it get there? What is the route of spread of that intracranial tumor? Because depending on the route of spread will be your surgical steps. Which instrument you'll use, how you will use it, will depend on the route by which it has spread intracranially. And there are numerous routes. So it can go through the superior orbital fissure into the cavernous sinus and middle cranial fossa. It can go through the lateral wall of the sphenoid. It can go through the greater wing of the sphenoid into the middle cranial fossa, destroying the bone of the greater wing sphenoid. It can go through the Vidian canal, eroding the Vidian canal into the middle cranial fossa, through the palatovaginal canal, Vidian canal, and then to the middle cranial fossa, the foramen rotundum, through the roof of the sphenoid, and even through the cribriform plate. Of these, the two most important ones are the superior, or the most common ones are the superior orbital fissure cavernous sinus route and through the greater wing of the sphenoid into the middle cranial fossa. Since we have limited time, I'm going to talk only about these two routes. So this is a tumor which has gone through the superior orbital fissure into the cavernous sinus. But if you look at it, you can see it's also gone through the foramen rotundum. This is where the normal foramen rotundum would be. And this is the expanded foramen rotundum with enhancing tumor within it. So it's actually gone via two routes. And you need surgical steps which are different for both these. These are, of course, the postoperative scans. Now, let us look at this tumor. It's gone through, it's a very large infratemporal component, and then it's gone through the inferior orbital fissure and is a very large intraorbital component as well. Now, initially, when we were doing it, we would think that it is necessary to remove the tumor as a whole. So this is one of my earlier surgeries that I've done, where we've kept the entire tumor intact and removed it. So this is the nasal cavity part of the tumor, and we are now holding it, grasping it, and we are trying to remove this infratemporal extension of the tumor, deliver it into the nasal cavity. So you can see this is the infratemporal extension being delivered out into the nasal cavity. Now the next thing that you're going to do is look for the inferior orbital fissure area. So now the entire, this is the orbit. The lamina papyracea has been removed. You can see the orbital fat under the orbital periosteum. And this is the tumor going into the orbit through the inferior orbital fissure. The bones have been removed. And this is the tumor. So now here, you need to apply force in an inferior medial direction. So the direction of the force also matters. Different extensions you need to deal with differently. So this is delivering the tumor from the orbit. And as you can see, we are separating it from the orbital periosteum and the periorbita. Now, once you've got it out of the orbit, the next thing is to go for the extension in the cavernous sinus. This is the part from the orbit. And now the direction of pull is inferiorly and backwards to pull out the extension which is in the cavernous sinus. That's the extension from the cavernous sinus out. That's bleeding from the cavernous sinus. And you can just about see the carotid artery there. Now, this is a later case where we started truncating the tumors using coblators or harmonic scalpels. I use the coblator a lot. So the extracranial bit has been completely removed. And now this is the sphenoid sinus. That's the nasopharynx. The floor of the sphenoid sinus has been drilled. And now we are looking at removing the intracranial bit. This is the wall of the medial wall of the superior orbital fissure and the cavernous sinus. So we're removing the bony wall. This is, there are blood vessels there which we cauterize with a bipolar. And this is cutting through the medial, the dura of the cavernous sinus. And then, so this is the same thing. There are blood vessels there at the orbital apex and from the dura of the cavernous sinus, which need to be cauterized, and then the tumor can be removed. Sometimes you even need to pull upwards instead of downwards to deliver that dumbbell of the tumor. As you can see, there are 3 hands working on that. And as the tumor uncorks the cavernous sinus, that's when the bleeding starts. You don't get bleeding before that. And when you get this free range of blood is when you know that the entire tumor is out. We usually use Flow-Seal, but there are times when we don't have it or the patient can't afford it. And we use a ball of Vaseline, which we call a laddu. And we close off the cavernous sinus with that for some time. If it stays there for about 15-20 minutes, and you remember, you have to always remember to take it out. 15-20 minutes later, if you take it out, there's not much any not much bleeding. Now, one thing I'd like to say here, that the involvement of the cavernous sinus can be like this, like, firm, solid, like bulbous involvement, which is relatively surgically easier to tackle. Sometimes you get what is a very fibrillar, noodle-like involvement of the cavernous sinus. This tumor tends to be softer. You can see the flow voids. It tends to be more vascular. And this one requires far more surgical expertise to be able to remove that. Now, the lateral spread into the middle cranial fossa. I'm going to show you, this is the greater wing of the sphenoid. That's the pterygoid base. That's the maxillary nerve in the foramen rotundum. That's the foramen rotundum. That's the Vidian canal. This is the pterygoid wedge. Now you need to drill. The tumor will extend in the pterygoid wedge between the Vidian canal and the foramen rotundum. So this is a cadaveric dissection. That is the maxillary nerve, which has been decapped from the foramen rotundum. That's the Vidian nerve. And this is the pterygoid wedge that the tumor dissects through. And when you remove this bone, that's the dura of the middle cranial fossa and the brain in the middle cranial fossa. Now I'm going to show you the same thing with a tumor. That's the tumor which has gone through the greater wing of the sphenoid into the middle cranial fossa. You can see it's disc-like and it's being dissected. I use a 2-suction technique and dissect it off the dura of the middle cranial fossa. That's the disc-like extension in the middle cranial fossa, as you can see, being delivered out. That's the sphenoid. This is where the normal greater wing of the sphenoid would be. And this is the eroded greater wing of the sphenoid with the dura exposed that one can see. So after we dealt with intracranial tumors, the next thing that we came across, or rather, this is an idea which came to me while I was doing one of the surgeries, and that was the 4-port technique. The 4-port technique is actually an extension. It's a progression. It's a natural progression of the push-pull technique. So let's just have a look at this. That's the posterior wall of the maxillary sinus. This is the pterygoid wedge, and this is the pterygopalatine fossa between the two. This is the Vidian nerve, which reaches up to the paraclival carotid. That's the carotid, and that is the petrous apex. Now, when you're operating endoscopically from the nose through both the nasal cavities, this is the arc in which you can operate. So whether it's Meckel's cave or pituitary, you can operate very simply because very straightforward, because it lies within that arc of access through the nasal cavity with the endoscope. The problem is that the angiofibroma with its feeding vessel lies outside this arc, outside this zone. And therefore, it becomes necessary to do one of two things. Either get the angiofibroma into the zone, or then use certain techniques by which you reach the feeder vessel. So one of the things which has been actually, this technique of modified Denkers endoscopically has been actually used far more in inverted papillomas. I'm quite happy to use it for inverted papillomas because inverted papillomas involve the lacrimal system, they involve the anterior facial skeleton, they occur in people in their 4th and 5th decades. I don't like to use it in angiofibromas because they are young boys for whom their anterior facial skeleton is very, very important. And the angiofibroma never involves the anterior facial skeleton, it never involves the lacrimal system. And I feel to destroy them or to sacrifice them is just not something I would do in a young boy. So if one were to do the modified endoscopic Denkers, one would remove the inferior turbinate along with transecting the nasolacrimal duct, which is here. The posterior lateral wall of the maxilla will always be eroded or will have to be removed, and the anterior facial skeleton from the piriform aperture laterally as is required so that one can reach the maxillary artery. Now, that is the bone which is actually being removed. So most of the anterior part of the maxilla is gone. The posterior lateral wall of the maxilla is already eroded by the tumor. So look at this tumor. This is the tumor and this is the maxillary artery. Now, if one wants to reach the maxillary artery first with this tumor in place, this is what one would have to do. One would have to remove that much of bone to be able to access this artery. The inferior turbinate would go. And then imagine that after you remove this tumor, what would you have? This is what you would have. You would have anterior facial skeleton gone along with the piriform aperture, an entire big void and only covered by skin and subacute tissue. Now, immediately after the surgery, for the first 6 months, years, 2 years, it doesn't really matter because the skin of young people is supple and strong. But over 5 to 6 years, and this I've seen developing after 5 years, this is what can happen. The fibrosis can cause the facial musculature to be sucked inwards. I've also seen epiphorema and a dry congested eye, and this patient actually hides his face behind massive spectacles, which doesn't need. So, like I said, the angiofibroma does not involve the anterior facial skeleton in a young boy. So how does one remove this tumor? This is the same tumor that we saw. How does one remove this tumor without affecting the anterior facial skeleton? Now, they're both boys with similar tumors, which we have removed. And you can see that this was done and the patient came to me as a recurrence. This is a patient that we operated, keeping the anterior facial skeleton. And definitely, I think in a young boy, this is very important that their face remains as handsome as they would like it to be. So how do we do it? We do it by what is the 4-port technique. So we believe that there are 3 major pillars which hold up the mid face, which give structure to the mid face. The first one is the septum, and therefore we remove only the posterior part of the septum in posterior septectomy while dealing with angiofibromas. The second is the piriform aperture, the frontonasal process of the maxilla, and the third is the junction of the maxillary anterior wall with the posterior lateral wall. So these are the 3 pillars and what we have done is we've designed ports on either side of these pillars. So let us say that the tumor is in the left nasal cavity. Then port A will be the contralateral nostril, that is the right nasal cavity. Port B will be the left nasal cavity. Both of these can communicate with each other through a posterior septectomy, right at the back, so that about posterior 1.5 centimeter of the septum is removed. The anterior septum, of course, is not touched. The third port is port C, which is like a canine fossa window. So the fossa window has to be just big enough to be able to allow a scope and a Blakesley to go through. So one instrument or a scope to go through. And the fourth is, of course, the same buccogingival sulcus incision that you saw in push-pull. It's near the buccogingival sulcus near the 3rd and 4th molars. And we use these 4 ports interchangeably to be able to remove very, very large external extensions without damaging any of these 3 pillars. And therefore, the structure of the midface remains intact. And the lacrimal system, this is the lacrimal fossa, that's where the nasolacrimal duct would come down. Even the lacrimal system is maintained intact. This is the port C. As you can see, most of the anterior facial skeleton is intact, just a small canine fossa window. And this, of course, as I said, was the port D. This we've seen, this is how one would do with using a port B and a port D. This is the port B, that's the ipsilateral nostril, and the port D, which is in the buccogingival sulcus. Now, I'm going to show you how you can use port B and C to remove tumor. This is the right nasal cavity, that's the nasopharynx. This is the pterygoid wedge. It's been eroded by the tumor. And what we're doing now is we're using the ipsilateral nostril. That's the right nasal cavity, right nostril, as well as the canine fossa. So this has come through the ipsilateral nostril, and this is the cautery coming through the canine fossa. So through the right nostril as well as through the canine fossa, and you can see how you can deal with this. Now, this is what I call chopstick surgery. Now, the other, let's see another case. There's a port A, B, and C. That means you're using the contralateral nostril, the ipsilateral nostril, as well as the canine fossa window. And this is what the surgery looks like. This is the left nasal cavity. The nasopharynx will be here. This is the infratemporal fossa. This is a tumor in the pterygoid wedge. And as you can see here that it's, I'll just show you. It's in the pterygoid wedge, and it's in the, it's eroded the greater wing of the sphenoid. And this is how you can see that in this, the Blakesley, which is holding the tumor, has come through the ipsilateral nostril. The suction, the curved suction has come through the contralateral nostril. And this small forceps, which is actually delivering the tumor, has come through the canine fossa. So there are two surgeons working with each other. In my case, the entire journey that I've had a wonderful partner in Dr. Anagha Joshi. And generally we do these tumors. I usually have one of my senior faculty with me as well. So this is how, the instruments are used like chopsticks. And you can see that it's now being separated from the dura of the middle cranial fossa. Occasionally you can get a CSF leak because the dura is thinned out. But as you can see now, that's the entire tumor delivered out. And this is the dura of the middle cranial fossa, which has been eroded. So that's the sphenoid. That was where the greater wing of the sphenoid was. And that's where the dura was eroded. We usually, we put some Surgicel there, and then we put a fascia lata graft, because we have seen CSF leak develop even as late as about 10 years after the surgery if there's no proper closure of that defect. And this is what it looks like when you look at it extracranially. So the primary surgeon is using the two Blakesleys, and the assistant surgeon is using the suction as well as the endoscope. Now we come to almost the last few techniques that I would like to talk about, and the last few issues that or challenges we faced during our journey, and that is intraosseous tumors. So these are tumors which lie within the bone of the skull base, and what the angiofibromas does is it erodes away cancellous bone, leaving the surrounding compact bone intact, just as a worm would eat away an apple. So when you look from the outside, it looks almost normal. The bone will look almost normal, as if there's nothing wrong with it. But if you just shell off the compact bone, you'll see the entire tumor lying within it. Look at this. This is the greater wing of the sphenoid. You can see there's no extracranial tumor remaining. And you can see that the two tables, compact tables of the bone of the greater wing of the sphenoid have been splayed, and the entire area within the bone is filled with this tumor. So much so that it has gone lateral to the orbital apex. And so when you say, at the end of this, oh, the whole tumor is out, ask yourself once, or is it? Is there some bone which lies within which the tumor lies hidden? And there are three main canals that one needs to remember. One is, of course, like I said, the foramen rotundum, the Vidian canal, and next, medial to the Vidian canal, the palato-vaginal canal. So these three canals, we've seen that the tumor grows like a noodle into these canals, like a fibrillar extension, and it can extend through the Vidian canal all the way up to the paraclival carotid. And I'm going to show you one video. So this is the normal Vidian canal. This is the pterygopalatine fossa, and look what happens with the tumor. It erodes all the way, and it can go all the way up to the carotid. And I'll just show you this. We'll stop that one. So this is the sphenoid. This is the Vidian canal. And we're trying to remove the tumor from the Vidian canal. And what I want you to see here is, can you see, this is one extension into the Vidian canal, and this is a second extension going into the palatovaginal canal. So you can have two such extensions extending like noodles into these canals, and you need to remove both of them under vision, and then later on, of course, drill the skull base. Sometimes this is a revision case where when I was removing the tumor, I saw that the previous surgeon had cut the maxillary nerve. And with a 0-degree endoscope, you can even see the mandibular nerve coming down through the greater wing of the sphenoid. So that's the maxillary nerve cut, and that's the mandibular nerve. We see the mandibular nerve quite often, and this is surgery which we are doing without removing the anterior facial skeleton and with a 0-degree endoscope. Now, about the carotid artery, just a few words, and that is, what is the relationship between the angiofibroma and the internal carotid artery? It's like this. The angiofibroma coils around the carotid artery. And usually, just as this hand has gone around the glass, imagine that's the carotid artery and that's the tumor. So usually it will go lateral to the parasellar carotid, the carotid siphon. It will go lateral and it will curve around, like wrap it around itself and go medial to the paraclival carotid. So let me show you that in an actual. So I've just marked out the tumor for you. This is the carotid artery. This is the parasellar part of the carotid artery, and you can see that the tumor has gone lateral to the carotid siphon, and here it has gone medial to what will be the paraclival carotid. And it's very important. What we usually do is we'll bisect the tumor here and remove this separately and this separately. Let me just show you that. So this is what the carotid artery looks like on dissection. That's the siphon, that's the paraclival carotid. Of course, it's collapsed, but this is what it will look like. And this is how, this is the tumor which has been removed, and this is the parasellar siphon of the carotid and the paraclival carotid. One other artery which we don't talk about very often and which really needs to be spoken about in angiofibroma is the ophthalmic artery, given off at the medial OCR near the anterior clinoid process, just as the artery goes in intradural, as it passes into the subarachnoid space. So this is the ophthalmic artery, and the ophthalmic artery along with the carotid artery can also give vessels to the tumor. And I'll show you this. So this is the tumor being removed from the cavernous sinus. And as you can see this is one artery, it's a feeder vessel from the carotid. The cavernous sinus is open, the carotid artery lying within the cavernous sinus. And this is the artery coming from the carotid artery. Use a bipolar, cauterize and cut it. And then release the tumor. And you can see a second lateral one, which when it comes laterally, it quite often comes from the ophthalmic artery. We're doing the same thing and then cauterizing and cutting and removing the tumor. Sometimes you can see the nerves this is the carotid artery, and this is the nerves in the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus. As you remove these tumors, you can sometimes see those nerves. You have to be careful not to damage them. So as the tumor comes out, this is the typical trabecula in the cavernous sinus, and these are the nerves which you can see in the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus. And now finally, I'd like to mention a little bit about the angiofibroma grid. This is a way of classifying. There are lots of classifications of angiofibromas, some which are clinically relevant, some which have come after the endoscopic era. But this is one classification that I'd like to discuss with you. And that is because you don't have to memorize. You see, it's very difficult to memorize classification, to know which is stage 3 in one, stage 3 in the other. Now, this is a tumor that you don't need to memorize. This is not a classification you need to memorize. It's like a visual analog scale. You just need to see the classification rather than memorize it. So, it's very simple to make out what is what by just looking at these faces. So also, the angiofibroma grid is a way of classifying the angiofibroma where you don't need to remember it. You just need to look at this grid. And you can see that it's divided into green zones, light green, dark green, orange, red, and gray zones. The light green and dark green are easier tumors to remove. Orange is intermediate difficulty. The red requires expertise of a significant degree of expertise. And the gray is really the gray area where even an expert surgeon might think, is it worth trying to remove this tumor at the risk to the patient's life? So this is how it's divided the grid. So basically it's based on the findings of the contrast enhanced CT scan or MRI and objective findings on the scans. It has 9 rows and 9 columns. The first column is the region, the main region. The second column is just the first letter of the region. And then the 9 rows depict the sub-regions. So let's go back to that and have a look. So the first column is the main region. The other columns are the region, the sub-regions in increasing level of difficulty. For example, let's say lateral spread. So the lateral spread is the main region that we are talking about. That's L. And you can see that it goes from pterygopalatine fossa to infratemporal fossa, then a very large component in infratemporal fossa, then the parapharyngeal region and the temporal fossa. So gradually increasing in difficulty from left to right. Similarly, the orbit, you see just entering the inferior orbital fissure or then completely involving the inferior orbital fissure or going to the superior orbital. So from left to right, it is from simpler to difficult. Now, when you look at the CT scan and you start shading these squares, and depending on what squares you shade, it will be either a green, orange, red zone tumor or a gray zone tumor. If you shaded all the green squares and only one orange square, it still becomes an orange zone tumor. So looking at the CT scans, putting this down on the grid will tell you whether, you will need backup or you need someone senior to help you out, or whether, the whole preoperative planning will depend on what kind of grid that you shade of that particular tumor. So basically, like I said, contrast enhanced CT scans. So you first do a contrast enhanced CT scan and an MRI in all 3 planes. Take a printout of the grid and look at each region on the CT scan. And if it is involved, you shade the representative square on that grid. And depending on the pattern of squares shaded, the tumor is divided into light green, dark green, orange, red, or gray zone tumors. And there's a lot more to that, but we won't talk about it right now. And now I come almost to the end, and that is this. There are certain messages I want to leave. One is that when one is operating, one must know when to pause and when to stop. Pause is if the surgeon is experiencing a lot of fatigue, then that is not the time to go in to remove it from around the carotid. So you may want to stage the surgery and go back another day if required. And when to stop. There are times when the risk-benefit ratio, what is the risk to the patient's life compared to what is the benefit of removing that last 0.5 centimeter of tumor, that needs to be weighed before one proceeds. And how can one predict the prognosis of the change? And there are a lot of factors we've studied, but the 3 most important factors are whether it's a primary or revision surgery, whether you have planned preoperatively correctly, and whether there is any involvement of the cancellous bone. These are the 3 factors that we found which work the most in deciding whether the tumor will come back or not. And therefore, sometimes the take-home message is that the first chance is the best chance, and sometimes the only chance to get it right. I'm going to leave you with a couple of films. Just look at this. And you can see that the person who finally netted that ball was not the person who got it from across the court, which means that you need multiple players to be able to net that ball. It's not the job of a single person. And therefore, when people say, I did the angiofibroma surgery, they haven't really understood the tumor. Because angiofibroma surgery is a team surgery, and it will always be, we did the angiofibroma surgery. And I'd like to acknowledge all the we's in my department. There's Dr. Anaga Joshi, Dr. Kshitij Shah, and of course, all my residents all together who are responsible for forming that team, which works towards making people well, making young boys with angiofibroma as well. And sometimes we get angiofibroma clubs like this developing in our ward. I'll leave you with a line from one of my favorite movies, Star Trek. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, ma'am. It's always an enriching experience to listen from you regarding angiofibroma. and you have already answered all the questions. And usually, after the oration, we usually don't
Dwaipan, I can't hear you.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Snehashish, can you hear me?
Yeah. You are audible. Madam, can you hear us? Madam?
Hello, Renuka ma'am.
Hello.
Madam, actually, we are, everyone is audible except you cannot hear us?
No, I can't hear. I think the host and the support has muted me.
Support team, can you check?
No, ma'am are unmute already.
Ma'am, can you hear us?
Support team.
Yes.
Yeah, from the viewers, we are getting the message that the connection timed out.
Yeah, Dwaipan, I can hear you now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Please look after the matter. Ma'am, it's always an enriching experience to hear from you regarding angiofibroma. And you have already answered all the questions. And usually after the oration, we usually don't take the questions, but we have received many questions and you have already answered all those questions. So right now I will request Snehashish and Dr. Shubhajit Banerjee to say something and to hand over the Abilal Mukherjee oration certificate and medal to ma'am, though virtually.
Thank you, madam. Can you hear me?
Yes, I
Hello.
can hear you. Yes.
It was a nice presentation and you have covered all the aspects of JNA. Thank you very much again. And you have answered all the questions which are being asked in the WhatsApp group. Thank you again. We are handing over the certificate to you now.
Thank you so much.
Madam, the advantage of this program, organizing this program on digital platform is that we can reach all ENT surgeons throughout India and every corner of West Bengal. But the disadvantage is that we cannot felicitate you with medal and certificate on stage. So we will send you the medal and certificate by post. And now I can only read out the felicitation certificate for everyone. I am sharing the certificate. Madam, from AY West Bengal, we the members of AY West Bengal feel proud to felicitate Dr. Renuka Bradu for delivering the prestigious Dr. Abilal Mukherjee Memorial Oration on topic Angiofibroma Triumphs and Travails, held on 23rd August 2020 at 6:30 p.m. on digital platform, signed by our President, Dr. Subhajit Banerjee. Thank you, ma'am, for a wonderful presentation. Everyone is enlightened with, and learned a lot from. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all also. Okay.
It's an honor, and I'm delighted to have been here. And I even though I don't have the certificate in my mind, in my hand right now, I think it's the thought that counts the most. And Kolkata has always been very, very
And
special.
we know. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Right. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all viewers for watching us.